It's so
Hi.
nice to see you.
I know, it's so nice to see you too.
How are you? Looks like are you in your dorm room?
I am. I go to NYU.
Very nice. Okay, so as you know, as per my email, I've started this YouTube channel, touching base with mostly my former students to ask what, if anything, you would have studied more closely or something that maybe was not even touched upon at all if you were given the opportunity to. So, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I realize that a lot of the things that I'm interacting with and working with on a daily basis didn't even exist. And if they existed, they weren't considered a marketable or important field when I was in fifth grade.
Yeah,
And number one being social media.
right.
Being an influencer was not something that's oh yeah, you could make millions of dollars off of that, you could live a
No,
good life. It just wasn't really something that people thought everyone could do. It was
right.
for people who dedicated their whole lives to it, and even then you had to be really lucky. They didn't really think there was strategy, there was no real planning put into something like that.
Okay.
But I think now you can see that a lot of people are working on that in their own brand. So even if you don't want to have your brand out there, you're going to have pictures of yourself out there, whether that's from family members posting it, whether that's from newspapers, news articles. In our town we have The Breeze.
Yeah.
Pictures of you and stories about you, news about you is gonna be shared. So
do you feel like branding is kind of taking control and ownership of that?
I do, yeah. I think it's fully accepting what kind of view you're putting of yourself out into the world.
What is branding?
Making sure that everything that's linked to you represents what you believe in and isn't tying you to anything that you don't want to be associated with. So what you wear, what you talk about, how you talk, what you like to do in your free time, all of those things are part of your personal brand. The other day I saw a tweet and it was about how people don't want to buy from companies. They want to buy from other people. And so if you look at the number of followers Elon Musk has versus the number of followers Tesla has, you'll see that Elon Musk actually has a lot more followers because he's just such an icon that people want to be like him. That's why they want to buy from his company, not the other way around. And I think that's a great example of personal brand. You have to make yourself into a person that people want to know, people want to interact with, people want to associate with, so that you can build yourself into whoever you want to be, and that can help you get wherever you want to be.
As the example you gave with Elon Musk, though he might have that many followers, does that necessarily mean that he's more well-liked? Because sometimes people follow those that, in fact, they don't actually support, just to kind of keep tabs on them. That's one question. And then the other is, what is the downside of that? Because then you might also buy so much into your own brand that you also forget that people have many, many layers to them. And sometimes those layers are contradictory.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's such a great question for me as someone who likes studying anthropology, because honestly it is really about what do people really want from other people, right? What are they expecting and how do they want that interaction to go down? And I think in terms of whether people are just following people to keep tabs on them or because they genuinely like them, I think in terms of branding, it doesn't really matter. And I think the reason for that is because, people say, any publicity is good publicity. Even if people don't like Elon Musk, they still know who he is. When he's talked about, what he says will still matter. Whether that's because they want to hate it or love it, it doesn't matter. It's still, it's something of significance because he matters. And I think that's, the most important part of branding, making sure you matter. So I think in terms of branding, it doesn't really matter who follows you or who you get your name out to. I think it just matters that you do.
I'm a little bit weary of that, though I agree with you that is the reality, because then it's almost like all people now are chasing is that clout and is that version of networking, without necessarily realizing that you need to have quality behind it.
Yeah.
You have to be able to back up your branding too. I think that's also important.
No, for sure. People who have millions and millions of followers, celebrities, they're going to make their money no matter what.
Yeah.
So they already have everything that they need from whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
The people who are trying to build up their social media or their own personal brand, they're the ones who have to like constantly produce content, have to constantly, you know, work to maintain their fans and also to grow their base. But like people who have a company, they don't really care because their income is coming in no matter what, right?
Yeah.
The system is kind of shaped by those who are always gonna profit, you know?
What's the difference between clicks and branding? Because then is that not just a more sophisticated click, right? By branding yourself as, let's say, I am into cheerleading or I'm into sports. That's your stereotypical clicks, but now you're just taking it into social media. So is it the same thing or is it different?
The interesting thing about social media is that it allows people to connect with each other.
Yes.
So even though you might be branding yourself as something that would traditionally be part of a clique, since you're bringing it to a bigger group of people, you're expanding the amount of people that could connect to that topic. So it doesn't really, like, I feel like it's less cliquey in a sense. I think it just matters how open your mindset is about what bringing something to your brand means. So like if I say I really like Marvel, am I gonna introduce Marvel to other people? Am I gonna educate them, or am I gonna shun everyone who doesn't know as much?
I would happily join that. No, I would love that conversation. So meaning like you're not going to X out the DC folks, right?
No, of course not. But maybe some people would. So I think at that point it becomes more of a cliquey.
Yeah. Do you believe branding and social media is something that has longevity? Like you can sustain your status, whatever it might be, for the long term? Or do you feel like it's a short term experience? Do you think that overall it's a positive influence on society, or do you think that's yet to be determined?
Just the way that society is structured currently, it is very possible to maintain your lifestyle. But I do believe it is a full-time job. It just is a different type of full-time job because you have to constantly be reaching out to companies. You have to constantly be reaching out to those who also care about what you're interested in and building those partnerships that will allow you and other people to build that base. Because like some YouTubers that we know, Lily Singh, I watched her since she like started her YouTube career in like 2010.
Yeah.
But like now she's built her fan base so much, and that has allowed her to have a greater platform.
Right.
So I think like that kind of progress is possible, and I think more people are starting to do it with like transitioning from like dance videos to modeling with Charli D'Amelio and the whole TikTok phase. Like she has her own Dunkin' drink. It's like possible to do a lot with your brand, but it really matters on the platform that you have.
Now, I don't know the numbers on this, and it's totally okay if you don't either, but do you believe that, or as far as you know, do influencers really have influence? Or is it a persona of influence? If Charli D'Amelio has Dunkin' Donut drinks, has Dunkin' stock gone up? Has Dunkin' Donuts made more money, or is it just an image and impression that's being given?
It would be interesting to consider, but I think people may definitely have come to Dunkin' just for her drink.
I can see that for sure. Of course. That makes sense. The fact that I even know that she has a drink says, in and of itself, says a lot. You know what I mean? For her marketing branding. And so you said at the very beginning of this conversation that how it used to be, it wouldn't be something that would be considered when you were in 5th grade. And it's not something that would be offered as like a lifestyle, but it is slowly becoming something that could potentially be a career. Do you think that anybody can be an influencer, or is it similar to being an actress or an actor where, sure, anyone can try, but the probability is very low, or it's just very, very competitive? Or do you feel like, no, everyone has just as much of an opportunity?
It is definitely very competitive, but I think that if you have something that you're passionate about, like there's people that are only food influencers. All they do is make recipes, post them. And there's like mommy influencers that just talk about parenting. So I think if you find your niche, it is very possible to be an influencer within that. Because I think a lot of people don't really know what to think. They don't really have the time or the energy to find their own research on half the problems that they face on a daily basis. And if someone is going to be there giving them all of these solutions, most people will gladly take it. They don't care enough to be like, no, I want to find my own completely different way and I'm going to only do that.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. And it's just not something that's prioritized anymore, being like, oh, you have to take your own hard way out. It's more like if people have this is their full-time job to find me the best recipe for Thanksgiving dinner, okay, fine. I will go follow them and do whatever they say for Thanksgiving dinner. Like,
Yeah.
I just don't need to be as original with it, you know?
Okay.
I just want to finish answering your second question that you posed originally.
Yes.
About whether or not I think this is good. I honestly don't really think so because I enjoy my privacy personally. But I feel like at the same time, like at NYU, it's a really big school. So even though I may, like, I have over 1,000 followers on Instagram. And I was talking to someone the other day and they were like, oh, how do you have over 1,000 followers on Instagram? I barely have half of that. And I was like, well, it's not like I'm following a bunch of people I don't know. Like everyone that I follow is related to me in some way, whether they go to my school, whether I know them through a friend of a friend. And most people I have met multiple times or I've met at least once and talked to at least once. So I think it's just like, people say that you can be a micro-influencer with over 1,000 followers. I have no desire to be a micro-influencer, but I think it's interesting.
Watch, after this video, we're going to make it happen, Krishna. We're going to make it happen.
But I think it's important to consider that the amount of people you just need to know to be considered an influencer just like
is wild.
Yeah, I think like privacy is going to be one of the most valuable things going forward in the future.
And it's so hard to find even when you want to find it because people will find you even when you don't want to be found. Following up to what you just said, number one, I feel like then there should be a sense of accountability because we do have a lot of people who are branded, particularly in the health field, like working out or nutritionists or diets or the proper way to do certain squats or lunges. And I feel like there's a lot of misinformation that people are selling because they don't actually have qualifications, but nobody's going to hold them accountable really on social media, on a TikTok or an Instagram. And that's very dangerous. So I think that's kind of where my appreciation for what you're saying is coming, because we should then bring that conversation to younger grades so that if you are going to brand yourself, but just make sure you're backing that up with actual knowledge, awareness, education. And then if no one is holding them accountable, where does that sense of responsibility come from? Because if you are getting X amount of followers, regardless of your education or background on the subject, that's scary.
I think a lot of times people share from their own experiences. But because their experiences have worked for them, people think that, oh, it's like proven and it will work. But a lot of times, since everyone's body is different, that may not be the case. And I think that's not really something that's talked about as much, especially in terms of like building muscle and like protein shakes and things like that. Because there is such a risk. Like, I think like pre-workout and things like that, like people take it and it's become like a really big fad in the past year to like take pre-workout and then do your workout, so you'll work out for longer and you'll work out harder. But does that like have lasting effects? We don't know because the research hasn't been done yet. But they're also just like no one is gonna care to wait for the research because they're like, oh, it works for them, you know, and it works for me, it makes me feel good. It doesn't matter because most people who are doing this are like in their teens and their early 20s. They're not really thinking about what are the long-term effects this is going to have on my body.
Right. How would you approach this topic with young minds?
A lot of people nowadays are kind of starting to consider what are the other options for them besides college.
Yes.
And I think a lot of things have brought about that change.
Yes.
especially the past year with the pandemic, because like people took gap years. People actually took the opportunity to say, okay, if I wasn't studying, what would I actually be doing with my life? But it's so stigmatized, especially for me, coming from a South Asian family.
Yes.
It's like education is so important. You can't consider any other options.
Right.
But a lot of people are trying to break those molds.
Yes.
There's a lot of people who are models, photographers. They set up the things themselves. And especially, like, a lot of South Asian people are coming out and doing this themselves, and they're starting it.
Pursuing their passions. Yep.
Exactly. And some people manage to make it work with their professional careers as well. And some people manage to fully make this their whole full-time job. And I think just having those conversations and starting from somewhere with your support system is really what can make a difference here.
Do you think, though, it's also important and our responsibility, even as non-influencers, to let the kids know that there is a lot of work behind what they're seeing in a post?
Definitely.
What kind of things do you think do go behind being an influencer? What kind of work? I know you mentioned it is a full-time job, so what kind of work do you think that it requires?
I think it requires a lot of planning in terms of what, like when you figure out first that this is your brand, this is your niche, this is what you want to do, you need to figure out, okay, what kind of advice am I going to do? And then you have to find a meaningful way to continue engaging with your audience. And then grow your audience, which a lot of times requires you to, like, you know, tag other people in your posts or tag people that will have a similar platform to you, so that when people follow them, your post will come up or things like that. And I think doing a lot of this research in the early stages takes a lot of work. And then also, like, people will plan out their photo shoots or plan out their content and spend like a whole day or two just like creating all of that, because a lot of times people will have informative slides that they post. And then also, like, you obviously have to make money off of this, so finding some way to actually, you know, maybe work with companies, or if you have like an Instagram and a YouTube, and for your YouTube channel you do like giveaways or stuff like that. I think like a lot of planning comes into actually monetizing this and making it, if it's the only way that you're making any money, then it definitely has to be something that you put a lot of time into.
As an anthropologist, I'm going to go ahead and call you that because that's what you're going to be. What influence has this had on society as a whole? Positive, negative, a little bit of both? What do you think? Self-esteem, confidence, our perception of what's real? How do you think all of this comes into play?
Overall, it's definitely had a little bit of both positive and negative influence. And I think the positive comes from the huge flood of information that is now found online. And that's about so many different topics that weren't found online before. You had to dig through books, you had to dig through articles, you had to dig through movies, journals, documentaries, all of which has now been like divided and put up there in very like easy bits of information for people to understand. But I think the downside of that is exactly what you said. You don't know what is real. You don't know, because a lot of times people don't post references. Nobody wants to look at references. Nobody cares where it's from. They trust the source. They think it's fine. Nobody double or triple checks it. And I think that is one of the biggest downsides. You don't know if what you're seeing is true or not. And it might be true only for a specific subset, but you would never know that. So I think it's really, really hard to know what's real and fake, and that can also affect the viewer's self-confidence. It's hard to tell whether or not that's going to have like lasting effects or not, and how to change that in the future.
I mean, in the grand scheme of things, this is a very recent development. I mean, even though it doesn't feel recent, it is in the grand scheme of things. Sometimes I think about, if you're really busy changing the world or really working on things that are truly impactful for society, are you really going to have time for social media? Like, sometimes I think about, like, is Bill Gates tweeting all the time? Is Bill Gates sitting there and looking through Instagram or TikTok? People that are really in the midst of making world-changing decisions, are they on social media?
I think that the people who are actually probably busy working are not on social media. But I don't think that means that if you do spend time on social media, it's like you're not putting in actual effort into
Right,
the things
elsewhere.
that you care about.
Absolutely.
I think it's like social media is just an outlet for a lot of people when they need a break or they're bored, or for like really positive things like connecting with people they don't really see, and having something like this. So I think even though the people who are probably affecting real change aren't on social media, the reason that they're not on social media is because their work doesn't need them to be. And if it did need them to be, then they would probably do it.
Right.
So it's not like it's taking anything away. It's just not adding anything for them, and that's why they're not on it.
It could also very well just be generational, right? If that's not something that they grew up with, then it's not something that they're going to be relying on. You had to teach a class then. So you had to teach a class of 5th or 6th graders, let's say 3 lessons on branding yourself, because that is essentially what they will eventually have to do. Even when you're applying for a job, in a way, you are branding yourself or marketing yourself in a particular way so that you are hired in a particular field. So what would you tell kids who are entering a very, very heavily social media based world to do?
First, that they need to know themselves, and they need to take as much time as they need to understand completely what they like to do, why maybe they need to like sit down and like journal and understand like why they enjoy the things that they do, or maybe they won't understand that, but at least if they have a core base understanding of what they like to do, and like what are their favorite cities, what are their favorite foods, what are they genuinely passionate about, and what would they actually spend hours reading or researching about, things like that, they'll stay with them forever. And I think that's really important because it'll make a huge impact in what they care about in the future and what kind of like social media they're going to get into, because those are the topics that they're going to be constantly seeing news about, constantly like posting about and interacting with. So just knowing that and knowing what do you want to see is very important. I think secondly, I would say learn how you want to be seen. What do you want your image to be like? From your hair to your face to what kind of makeup you want to wear, if you don't want to wear makeup at all, how you want to dress, what kind of life you want to make for yourself. So maybe make a vision board and put like pictures of your ideal aesthetic on there, and just like think about when you envision yourself 20 years in the future. And it might be like, wow, 20 years? I don't even think I could be that old for someone in 5th grade, because I remember feeling that way. But like, you know, genuinely just sit and think like, okay, where do I want to be? And that will obviously change. But I think constantly checking in with yourself is very important about that.
Okay. And the third thing?
Take time for yourself. Like, you don't always have to be working on your brand and working on how you appear to people. Take time to connect with the people in real life, not just like on social media.
So knowing who you are, how do you want to be seen, and connecting with those around you, and spending time with yourself. I think that's awesome. Do you think that what ends up happening sometimes is when you don't have a sense of who you are, just simply either because you haven't had enough life experience or because you've had all of this imagery bombarded in your face, basically, do you think that you end up seeing people who are emulating what other people have put out there because they think that is what is cool, or they're like, oh, I like that, so I'm going to take that and make that my own identity? And in that, do you think we kind of get lost a little bit?
I definitely do think that happens. And I think that also leads to people feeling sad when they're not able to achieve that. And that may not even be what they want. That may not even be what they need, or that may not even be what they're destined to achieve. But they'll still feel like loss and incompleteness just because of that. And I think that's something that when you feel like you have to get out of, but it's really, really hard. So if you can prevent that from the beginning, it's so much easier.
I think that's the only thing I would add to teaching the kids or talking with the kids is being aware of not falling into the trap of what other people have is what then I need to have just because they've made it seem so appealing.
Everyone has definitely experienced that in their life. I've definitely experienced that. But I think for me, it's always been I see things that I want, but I don't compare them to my own life because my experiences and the things that I want to achieve, I have my own plans for how to get there.
Yeah.
And I think I believe that everything that I want will happen, and if it doesn't happen, then it's not meant to be.
Right.
Yeah.
How do you see this translating into the real world and social interactions? How are you seeing, whether in college or in your personal life, sometimes unrealistic expectations that are put out there? And, you know, how do you see that transferring over into friendships and relationships? And do you think that we as a society, nothing is good enough and our expectations are just like all the way up here all the time?
In terms of certain things, there's definitely a lot of generalizations and stereotypes that have been made. TikTok sounds come out every day, and they are always used for a certain type of video. So one video that came up on my For You page a couple days ago was it's called the Midwest because everything in it is mid. So mid meaning it's not good enough.
Yeah.
And it was just funny, but it's and people use that for it's called the Midwest because it's everything in it is mid, as they're called boys because everything about them is mid. And I think things like that come out a lot, but I think people have just learned to say okay, I guess everyone just sucks, but I think that's because their expectations for people are really high and they're not understanding, and they're also not able to have that open dialogue that we were talking about meeting expectations and matching expectations to what actually can happen. In my personal life in general, I think people will always disappoint you if you let them, and if you don't tell them your expectations for them are at a certain level, they're not going to know. They're not going to know that they need to be better. They're not going to know that they hurt you. They're not going to know how to help your relationship. So unless you both take the step to do something about it, it's not going to change.
Because that's all tied into the expectations and whatever perceptions are being out there.
Exactly.
So was there anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I feel like we went through so much.
I know, I love it. I really appreciate your time, and keep in touch. Good luck at school.
Definitely. It was so nice to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I'm hanging in there. I mean, teaching in a pandemic is definitely interesting. But I've got very sweet students. They're very, very sweet, very hardworking.
Yeah.
Good luck at NYU. If I'm ever in the city, I'll let you know.
You should let me know. Yeah, I will. I can give you my phone number or something. I don't know.
Why don't you email me? Yeah, email it to me.
Okay, sounds good.
Bye. Thanks,
Bye.
Krishna. Bye.